December 18, 1944. 2,237 hours. Philippine Sea. Captain Toshiro Miyata gripped the compass binnacle aboard destroyer Yukake's as American star shells transformed night into artificial noon, each illumination round burning with 1.5 million candle power intensity for 30 seconds before another replaced it. The Americans kept the sky bright for 4 continuous hours, Miyata would write in his log. 4 hours. We carry perhaps 20 illumination shells total. They fired hundreds, perhaps thousands, as casually as striking matches. This single observation, scrawled in a cramped wardroom after the battle, captured the asymmetry that would define not just this engagement but the entire Pacific War's outcome, a conflict decided not by courage or tactics, but by the mathematical certainty that one side could afford to fire without thinking while the other counted every round like precious jewels. The industrial mathematics were already writing Japan's defeat before Miyata even recognized the equation. The awakening had begun 3 years earlier, though its implications remained hidden. On December 10, 1941, just 72 hours after Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Haruki Ito watched American destroyer USS Cushing engage Japanese aircraft during the Philippines invasion. His observation, recorded in Destroyer Division 4's War Diary, was clinical. Enemy destroyer maintained anti-aircraft fire for 47 minutes without pause. Estimated expenditure exceeded 2,000 rounds. Impossible by our doctrine. Impossible indeed. Japanese destroyers allocated precisely 300 rounds per engagement for anti-aircraft defense, not because this was optimal, but because magazines held nothing more. Ito's notation included a question mark in the margin, as if doubting his own mathematics. American ships seemed to operate under completely different physical laws. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe, gunnery officer aboard cruiser Aoba, trained his crews according to principles refined over 15 years of doctrine development. Each 8-inch gun came with explicit firing protocols: observe target, calculate range, fire one ranging shot, observe fall, correct, fire for effect. Maximum rate, 3 rounds per minute sustained. Not because Japanese guns were inferior, mechanically, they could fire faster, but because the entire logistics chain assumed careful, deliberate shooting. American cruisers, Watanabe observed at the Battle of Cape Esperance, fired salvos every 15 to 20 seconds regardless of observed accuracy. They corrected by walking their fire toward targets, expending 6 shells where Japanese doctrine used 1. Wasteful, Watanabe assessed in his report. But disturbingly effective. January 29, 1943. The Battle of Renil Island provided Commander Yasushi Nakamura with his first glimpse of the true disparity. His bomber squadron attacked a retiring American cruiser force, facing defensive fire of unprecedented intensity. The heavy cruiser Wichita alone fired 284 rounds of 5-inch ammunition in 23 minutes, more than Nakamura's entire air base had allocated for his squadron's next 6 missions combined. Of 16 bombers attacking, 11 were destroyed by this single ship's gunners, who fired with mechanical precision that suggested ammunition was unlimited. Because for them, it was. At Espiritu Santo, 840 nautical miles away, ammunition ships were already loading Wichita's resupply, 15,000 rounds of 5-inch shells, enough to replace her expenditure 53 times over. In Rabaul, Nakamura's quartermaster calculated whether they could spare 40 shells for gunnery practice. The answer was no. The production war's reality remained hidden from most Japanese officers, classified at the highest levels to prevent morale collapse. But statistics don't respect classification. By March 1943, the United States had mobilized industrial capacity beyond anything Japan's pre-war planners had imagined possible. Ravenna Army Ammunition Plant in Ohio achieved full operational capacity that month, covering 21,000 acres with 2,400 permanent buildings. This single facility would produce 3.2 billion rounds of small arms ammunition before war's end. To put this in context, Japan's total small arms ammunition production for the entire war, across all facilities, would barely exceed 12 billion rounds. Ravenna alone produced 27% of that total, and it was just one of 47 American ammunition production facilities. The Badger Army Ammunition Plant in Wisconsin specialized in medium-caliber ammunition, reaching peak production in August 1943, 450,000 rounds monthly of 40mm Bofors ammunition alone. Each round cost $1.20 to produce, weighed 2.4 pounds, and contained 0.22 pounds of high explosive. American factories produced these rounds with such precision that quality rejection rates ran below 0.03%. Meanwhile, at Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, Japan's premier ammunition facility, 16-year-old Masako Fujita worked 14-hour shifts filling 25mm shell casings with explosive compound mixed by hand because mechanical mixers had broken down and replacement parts didn't exist. She earned 40 yen monthly, roughly $1.40 at wartime exchange rates, while her American counterpart at Badger earned $178 monthly with full health benefits. April 7, 1943. Commander Shiro Kawamoto led Destroyer Squadron 3 on a supply run to Kalimbangara, carrying the 18th mission of the Tokyo Express. The cargo manifest told stories that mere tactical reports couldn't: rice, 2,400 drums. Medical supplies, 450 drums. Replacement weapons, 85 drums. Ammunition, 340 drums. For an entire garrison of 12,000 men defending a strategic island, 340 drums containing approximately 102,000 rifle rounds, 4,200 artillery shells of various calibers, and 88,000 machine gun rounds. That same night, the U.S. Army's 43rd Infantry Division at Rendova fired 127,000 rounds in a single harassment barrage designed not to hit anything specifically, but to deny Japanese troops sleep. One American division expended more ammunition keeping enemy soldiers awake than an entire Japanese garrison received for a month's combat operations. The training crisis accelerated throughout 1943, creating cascading failures that would prove impossible to reverse. Ensign Takeshi Nakano received his fighter pilot training at Chuchiura Air Corps in September 1943, part of the accelerated program designed to replace devastating losses. His flight training log recorded 73 hours total before carrier qualification, barely adequate for basic competency. But more devastating was weapons training. Nakano fired his aircraft's machine guns exactly 4 times, expending 180 rounds total. Gunnery instructors explained they simply lacked ammunition for realistic training. Compare this to Ensign Robert Cunningham, training at NAS Jacksonville the same month, 380 flight hours, including 67 hours of dedicated gunnery training during which he fired 8,400 rounds at towed targets, aerial sleeves, and ground ranges. Cunningham was an average pilot in an average training class. Nakano was among Japan's best remaining prospects. The mathematical outcome was predetermined. The human dimension of industrial disparity manifested in countless small tragedies that, accumulated, represented civilizational collapse. On November 15, 1943, the 600-year-old temple bell at Kinkakuji in Kyoto was removed for war material requisition. Master monk Tenshin Okumura, 74 years old, wept openly as workers loaded the bell onto a military truck. This bell was cast in 1343, he told the officer supervising collection. It has rung for 23 generations. How many shells will it make? The mathematics were crushing. One 400-kilogram bell yielded approximately 340 kilograms of usable copper tin alloy, enough for 1,600 shell casings of 75 mm caliber. An American light cruiser's 6-inch guns could expend that many rounds in 45 minutes of combat. 6 centuries of craftsmanship, 23 generations of prayers, transformed into 45 minutes of American firepower. Meanwhile, at Lake Denmark Naval Ammunition Depot in New Jersey, worker Catherine Morrison spent her lunch break at the facility's bowling alley, one of 3 recreational centers built for the 7,800-person workforce. She earned $1.35 hourly, worked 48 hours weekly, and had access to on-site childcare for her 2 daughters while her husband served in the Pacific aboard USS Enterprise. Her job, inspecting 40mm ammunition for defects, passing roughly 2,800 rounds per 8-hour shift. In 1 month, Morrison personally inspected more ammunition than the entire Japanese garrison at Bougainville would receive for 3 months of combat. She was one of 485,000 Americans employed in ammunition production, working in facilities with cafeterias, medical clinics, and safety protocols that would have seemed fantastical to their Japanese counterparts. June 11, 1944. The philosophical breaking point arrived not during battle but during resupply, when Captain Miyata's destroyer Yukikaze pulled alongside fleet oiler Hayasui to refuel before the Mariana Campaign. During the 4-hour evolution, Miyata observed the American fleet on the horizon conducting what appeared to be routine training exercises. Through binoculars, he watched destroyers firing at towed targets, the guns flashing in steady rhythm. For training. They expend more ammunition in practice than we carry into decisive battle, Miyata wrote that evening. This is not warfare as we understand it. This is industrial process applied to human destruction. The Americans have built not a navy but a machine for converting raw materials into delivered violence, and we face this machine with handicraft production methods from another era. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, what American pilots would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, proved Miyata's assessment with brutal arithmetic. On June 19, 1944, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched 373 aircraft against Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 58 in what Japan hoped would be the decisive carrier engagement. Japanese pilots flew into defensive fire of previously unimaginable density. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, flying a Judy dive bomber from Carrier Junyo, survived by miraculous chance when his aircraft was hit 14 times but remained airborne. His after-action report provided chilling detail: the American formation's anti-aircraft fire did not aim at individual aircraft. They created cubic zones of exploding steel through which no aircraft could pass. I observed the battleship ahead firing all main battery turrets skyward with VT-fused shells that exploded in perfect altitude brackets. Their 5-inch guns fired in continuous rhythm, 15 rounds per minute per barrel, creating a curtain of destruction. I saw 9 aircraft disintegrate in perhaps 20 seconds, simply flying into this wall. The VT proximity fuse, one of the war's most closely guarded secrets, represented industrial and technological advantage that Japan could not match. Developed by Section T of the National Defense Research Committee and refined at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, the fuse contained miniaturized vacuum tubes, battery, radio transmitter, and receiver in a package that could withstand 20,000 times Earth's gravity when fired from a gun. Production required precision manufacturing at scales Japan couldn't approach. By June 1944, American facilities were producing 40,000 VT-fused shells daily. The proximity fuse didn't just improve anti-aircraft effectiveness by 300%, it fundamentally changed the tactical calculus, transforming anti-aircraft fire from aimed shots at predicted positions into area denial weapons that killed anything within lethal radius. The Philippine Sea battle's ammunition expenditure told the strategic story more clearly than tactical reports. American ships fired approximately 180,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition, 620,000 rounds of 40mm, and 1.4 million rounds of 20mm during 8 hours of air defense operations. This represented roughly 2,800 tons of ammunition expended. The defending fleet's ammunition ships, operating 150 miles east, carried sufficient reserves to replace this expenditure 14 times over. Japanese forces lost 395 aircraft in combat, plus 50 more when carriers Taiho and Shokaku sank. American aircraft losses, 29 in combat, plus 80 lost to fuel exhaustion during a risky night recovery, none to enemy fire. The ammunition disparity had transformed carrier warfare from pilot versus pilot combat into pilot versus industrial base mathematics. September 1944 brought the collapse of Japan's ammunition production infrastructure, not through American bombing. Strategic bombing of Japanese industry remained limited until 1945, but through submarine interdiction of raw materials. Copper imports from Dutch East Indies, essential for shell casings, fell to 18% of requirements. Lead for bullets dropped to 22% of minimum needs. The Hitachi Ordnance Factory in Ibaraki Prefecture, producing 75mm artillery shells, received 140 tons of copper monthly against requirements of 620 tons. Production fell from 18,000 shells monthly to 4,800 despite adding 1,200 workers, many of them middle school students aged 13 to 15 pulled from classes to fill factory floors. Lieutenant Hideo Yamashita supervised these child workers with growing despair. In his private journal, later recovered by occupation authorities, he recorded, "I am not a factory manager but a coffin carpenter. These children work with dangerous chemicals and heavy machinery they barely understand." Yesterday, 14-year-old Keiko Ito lost 3 fingers in a press accident. Today she returned to work, bandaged, because her family needs her 38 yen monthly wage. "We produced 127 shells today. The American ship bombarding Iwo Jima will fire more than that before lunch. What are we doing? What am I doing?" The October 1944 Battle of Leyte Gulf, history's largest naval engagement, demonstrated the ammunition war's final phase, where Japanese forces could no longer sustain combat even when achieving tactical surprise. On October 25, Admiral Takeo Kurida's center force achieved what should have been impossible: complete surprise against escort carriers of Taffy 3 off Samar. For battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers appeared at dawn just 20 miles from 6 escort carriers protected by 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. The Americans faced annihilation. What happened next defied every expectation shaped by material superiority calculations. Commander Robert Copeland, commanding destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, a ship displacing just 1,350 tons with 2 5-inch guns, ordered attack against heavy cruisers displacing 13,000 tons with 10 8-inch guns. His fire control officer, Lieutenant Robert Roberts, later testified, "We knew we had perhaps 30 minutes of ammunition if we fired at maximum rate. Captain Copeland's order was clear: fire every shell, then torpedo attack, then ram if necessary. We would trade our ship and lives for time." The Japanese couldn't understand that we had nothing to lose because replacement ships and crews were already training in the States. We were expendable precisely because America could afford to expend us. Samuel B. Roberts fired 608 rounds from her 2 5-inch guns in 35 minutes, far exceeding design sustained fire rates. Gun barrels glowed cherry red. The paint on gun shields burned away. Gunner's mate 3rd Class Paul Carr maintained fire even after Mount 52 lost power, manually loading and firing 6 additional rounds before a Japanese shell detonated in the magazine, mortally wounding him. Carr was found clutching the last 5-inch shell, still trying to load it into the destroyed gun. He died 30 minutes later, never knowing that his ship's suicidal attack had caused 3 heavy cruisers to turn away, buying precious time for carriers to escape. The Japanese perspective on Samar revealed the psychological impact of facing opponents who fought without ammunition constraints. Captain Toshio Abe, commanding heavy cruiser Tone, watched destroyer attacks with professional admiration and strategic horror. His report, recovered post-war, observed, "The American destroyers charged through their own smoke laying, firing main batteries continuously without regard to hit probability. They were not trying to sink our ships, they were trying to force us to maneuver, to slow down, to disrupt formation. And they succeeded because they could afford to waste shells on suppressive fire. We calculated each salvo carefully, trying to hit. They fired to create chaos, knowing more shells waited in reserve. We were fighting different wars, ours of precision from scarcity, theirs of overwhelming volume from abundance." Admiral Kurida's controversial decision to withdraw despite overwhelming force superiority has generated 80 years of debate. But logistics records reveal a hidden dimension. By the time Kurida ordered withdrawal, his force had expended approximately 2,200 shells of all calibers in 3 hours of combat. His ammunition reserve stood at roughly 60% of load, comfortable by American standards, critical by Japanese logistics. More importantly, Kurida knew with certainty that no resupply existed. Every shell fired at Samar was irreplaceable. American ships he was fighting had been resupplied 3 days earlier and would be resupplied again within 48 hours. This was not Kurita's cowardice but mathematical wisdom. Even victory would leave his force without ammunition to fight the next engagement, which intelligence indicated was coming. The human dimension of ammunition disparity created tragedies that transcended military defeat, representing cultural and civilizational loss that would echo for generations. By November 1944, Japan had requisitioned and melted 52,000 temple bells, representing 88% of all bells cast before 1800. Master bell caster Shuichi Odaguro, whose family had crafted bells for 11 generations dating to 1487, was ordered to oversee melting his family's legacy. His diary entry from November 14, 1944, "Today we melted the bell my ancestor Masanobu cast in 1603, during Tokugawa Ieyasu's reign. Its tone was perfect, singers used it to tune their instruments for 341 years. Tomorrow it will be shell casings that an American ship will fire into the ocean in perhaps 20 minutes of combat. We are not fighting a war. We are feeding our cultural heritage into an industrial furnace to produce materials for a battle we cannot win." The final strategic bombing of Japanese ammunition production came on August 7, 1945, 8 days before surrender, when B-29 struck Toyokawa Naval Arsenal. The facility, working at 130% of design capacity with 11,400 workers including 2,800 students aged 13 to 16, was producing approximately 42,000 shells monthly through heroic effort and systematic degradation of safety protocols. The bombing raid killed 2,477 workers, of whom 1,803 were under age 18. Survivor Michiko Tanaka, 15 years old, recalled, "The all-clear had sounded. We were returning to workstations. Then the second wave came. I saw my friend Yuki disappear in fire. She was 14. Her job was filling shells with powder. She died making ammunition for guns that had no other ammunition to fire. The waste of it all still haunts me." The final accounting of the ammunition war reveals disparity beyond comprehension. United States production, 1941 to 1945, 41 billion small arms rounds, 5.1 billion artillery and naval shells of all calibers, total weight exceeding 4.8 million tons. Japan's total production, all ammunition types, approximately 12 billion small arms rounds, 840 million artillery and naval shells, total weight approximately 490,000 tons. The raw ratio, nearly 10 to 1 in tonnage, understates qualitative differences. American ammunition featured VT proximity fuses, improved propellants, and quality control that kept dud rates below 2%. Japanese ammunition of 1945 vintage suffered 18% to 30% dud rates due to degraded materials, untrained workers, and elimination of quality control steps to increase production speed. Captain Miyata survived the war aboard Yukikase, the luckiest ship in the Imperial Navy, never seriously damaged despite 52 combat engagements. His post-war memoir, published in 1953, provided the most thorough Japanese analysis of the ammunition war. He wrote, "We convinced ourselves that Japanese spirit and tactical excellence would overcome American material advantage. This was not strategy but prayer. The Americans built 47 ammunition production facilities. We built 11, and by war's end only 3 functioned. They employed nearly 500,000 workers in modern facilities with safety equipment and adequate food. We employed 98,000, including tens of thousands of children, in dangerous conditions with inadequate training and starvation rations. We melted our cultural heritage for ammunition. They built their ammunition production facilities with bowling alleys and movie theaters for workers. This was not war between comparable powers. This was industrial civilization crushing pre-industrial ambition through sheer productive capacity." The final statistical comparison appears in dual production reports from August 14, 1945, the day before Japan's surrender announcement. At Kure Naval Arsenal, Japan's premier remaining ammunition facility, the daily production log recorded, 5-inch shells, 8, 75 mm shells, 34. 25 mm shells, 127. Small arms rounds, 18,400. Total, 18,569 rounds, all calibers. Worker strength, 447, including 160 students aged 12 to 16. Status, critical shortage of all materials. Quality control, suspended. Production rate, declining daily. Recommendation, none. Continue operations until ordered otherwise. That same day, 6,740 miles away, Hastings Naval Ammunition Depot in Nebraska reported, 5-inch shells, 8,200. 40 mm rounds, 84,000. 20 mm rounds, 180,000. Small arms rounds, 2.1 million. Total, 2,372,200 rounds. Worker strength, 4,200. Status, all materials adequate. Quality control, all specifications met. Production rate, exceeding quota by 12%. Recommendation, reduce production to 60% capacity due to anticipated war termination. Begin workforce transition planning for peacetime conversion. The mathematics were final, absolute, irreversible. One nation produced 127 times more ammunition on the war's final day than the other, while recommending production cuts because they had more than enough. The other scraped together every shell possible, knowing it was futile. Between these two realities lay not just military defeat but confirmation that modern warfare between industrial powers is decided in factories, not battlefields. The Pacific War proved that courage, skill, and determination matter only when both sides possess comparable industrial capacity. When capacity diverges by orders of magnitude, tactics become irrelevant, strategy becomes impossible, and defeat becomes mathematical certainty. Captain Miyata's final assessment, written in 1952, stands as epitaph for Japan's Pacific War. We did not lose because our soldiers lacked courage, they showed extraordinary valor. We did not lose because our admirals lacked skill, they demonstrated tactical brilliance repeatedly. We did not lose because our workers lacked dedication, they worked themselves to death. We lost because war between industrial powers is decided by production capacity, and we faced an opponent whose industrial capacity exceeded ours by such magnitude that no amount of courage, skill, or dedication could compensate. The Americans fired without thinking because their factories produced faster than their guns could fire. We counted every round because our factories could barely keep pace with peacetime training requirements, let alone wartime consumption. In that difference, firing without thinking versus counting every round, lay the war's entire story.